So today on Rogers Reads, I'm doing part one of my May wrap-up. That is to say, all of the books that I read during the first half of May. So stick around and see what I've been up to. Hey friends, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today I'm doing my May wrap-up, or I should say the first part of my May wrap-up, all the books that I read during the month of May. I think I read a total of 14 books this month, but I'm only doing half of it today, so I'm breaking up the video into two parts. So let's get cracking. So the first book that I read is entitled Time Waits by C.B. Lewis, and this is an ebook that I read, an ebook arc actually, so I'll put the cover up above somewhere. So this was a time travel novel, and as many of you know, I love time travel novels, and this one did not disappoint. Time Waits was a little bit unusual as it takes place in the future, 2041 to be exact, and one of our main characters is from the World War II era, a wounded and nearly dead Hungarian soldier named János Nagy, and accidentally stumbles through a temporal gateway to the future where he suddenly finds himself in a time period in a confusing place surrounded by strangers. So this aspect really added an interesting element to the story. And there's a slow burn romance in the story between János, our soldier, and Dieter, the flamboyant historian slash linguist who works for the Temporal Research Institution, which is the organization responsible for János' accidental time jump. So what was interesting here was to watch each of these two protagonists fight their attraction to the other. János, because of his internalized homophobia due to an especially horrific event that took place in his past, and then Dieter, who does not want to take advantage of this man who is now trapped 100 years in the future. Now, it's also worth mentioning that Dieter is suffering from severe PTSD as a result of his initial encounter with János when János first came through the gateway. And during this time, János nearly killed Dieter. But yeah, so both men, so what we have here are two men who are both suffering from physical wounds and deep emotional wounds as well. And the road to recovery is not easy for either of them. So thus, they have a plethora of issues they need to overcome. So in this way, this story ends up being quite an emotional read that takes us on a roller coaster of emotional ups and downs. There's pride, anger, aggression, resentment, hope, hopelessness, kindness, cruelty, hatred, and of course, love. Now, speaking of love, the romance here is pretty complicated as both men have traumas preventing them from really opening up to the other. And just when you think our guys have finally attained their happily ever after, the author throws in one final heart-wrenching curveball which sends both their futures into uncertainty. So besides being a compelling sci-fi adventure, it's about facing unimaginable heartbreak and coming out stronger on the other side, no matter how long it takes you. Now this is the first book in the Time Lost series, and I definitely plan on continuing on with the rest of the series. So the next book that I read during May was entitled The Paris Hours, written by Alex George. So this is a historical fiction novel that was recently a Book of the Month Club selection and alternates between 4 different characters over the course of one single day in Paris in 1927. So there's Jean-Paul, a heartbroken journalist who continuously searches for his missing daughter. There's Camille, the maid of Marcel Proust, who, when asked to burn all of his notebooks by Proust, she decided to keep one for herself. And then there's some intrigue on this notebook. Then there's Guillaume, who owes a debt to a crime boss in Paris, and if he doesn't pay up by the end of the day, he'll be killed. And lastly, there's Soren, an Armenian refugee who performs puppet shows for children. Some of them are a tad on the grisly side as he kind of relives his past during these shows. And let's just say that when he came to France, he left a very dangerous and horrific situation behind. So we get the story of these four people through a series of flashbacks, and we see firsthand secrets, the regrets, the sadness, the hopelessness, and the betrayal that each person, that each character is carrying. So via the book's short chapters, we get a glimpse of their past and present, their life journeys, their heartbreak, and their life lessons. So there's really a lot to tangle with these highly complex and damaged characters. So the author dives into numerous themes in this story. There's themes of war, love, loss, grief, murder. There's guilt, secrets, deception, and loneliness, with kind of an undercurrent of hope beneath it all. So this was really an elegant, evocative book with beautiful lyrical writing, which did have a melodic flow to it, and I found each character's backstory especially compelling. Oh, and we also have some guest cameos by Gertrude Stein, Marcel Proust, Maurice Ravel, and Josephine Baker, all of which added a little bit of fun and interest to the story. So the four characters' stories all come crashing together in a rather explosive and shocking way at the end of the book. Now, I will say that the end of the book, the ending here, is kind of left open to interpretation. So if you're the kind of person who likes everything nicely wrapped up at the end, then this may not be the book for you. But if you do like historical fiction and you like Paris, then you might want to give The Paris Hours a try. So the next book that I read during May was entitled Or What You Will by Joe Walton. This is actually an e-arc that I read, so I'll put the cover up above somewhere. So what a clever, unusual book this is. It's kind of a book within a book. And really, I'd say it's one of the most interesting experimental books that I've read. I have to admit that the initial stream of consciousness by the book's narrative at the beginning kind of threw me off and took a bit of getting used to as I desperately tried to figure out what the hell is going on. So once I understood that our narrator is sort of a self-aware muse with a distinct personality who's inside the head of a writer named Sylvia, then I was able to relax and then enjoy the story, which turned out to be quite an enjoyable ride. So the narrative alternates between the discussion between Sylvia and who's an aging fantasy writer who may or may not be dying, and her muse, which is the nameless narrator, I guess. So if we follow along with the latest fantasy novel that Sylvia is writing, which is a fusion between Shakespeare's The Tempest and Twelfth Night, which takes place in Illyria, one of the worlds that Sylvia wrote about in one of her earlier books. So it is in this place where we meet several Shakespearean characters, and we learn that in this place, immortality is possible. So it actually took me a while to realize, or to recall, that the title of this book, Or What You Will, comes from the original title of The Twelfth Night by Shakespeare, which was The Twelfth Night, Or What You Will. So the narrator / Sylvia's muse is trying to convince her to go to Illyria before she dies so that they can continue to be immortal together. And in so doing, he steers her story in this new direction. So what's interesting here is that in Sylvia's chapters, we learn about her challenging and painful past and how the narrator fits into all of it. And there's really a lot of different moving parts and layers to this novel, and I found it so much fun to be carried along with them. Now, I will say that this isn't the sort of story where you can just sit back with your feet up and mindlessly sail through it. It does require kind of a careful attention and the ability to quickly switch gears, even mid-chapter. Now, that's not to say that the story is difficult to follow, because it really isn't, as long as you don't let your attention waver too much. It might also be helpful for the reader to be somewhat familiar with the storyline of the Twelfth Night and the Tempest, plays by Shakespeare, as doing so could increase your enjoyment of the story. Now, there are a plethora of themes and subplots in this book. It's about art, creation, immortality, mortality, Italian history, magic, myths, Shakespeare. Also, it's about child abuse, emotional trauma, grief, and spousal abuse, and all of it comes together somehow cohesively in the narrative. I really enjoyed all the ideas in this story and how it went in so many exciting and fascinating directions. All in all, I love this magical gem of a book about a writer's life and the world and characters that she created. And though I'm not always a tremendous fan of speculative or experimental fiction, I thought that this book was brilliant, and I am so glad that it came to my attention. So the next book that I read during May was entitled Beach Read. This is written by Emily Henry. So this was another Book of the Month Club selection. And the story follows two popular authors, January Andrews and Augustus Everett, aka Gus, both very successful but polar opposites. January is a writer of romances / women's fiction, whereas Gus is a writer of somewhat dark, moody, and serious literary fiction. Now, Gus and January aren't strangers. They were in writing classes together years ago, and there's kind of an animosity between them. So this way, they're kind of nemesis. So on one hand, we have the happily ever after swoony romance writer, and then the doom and gloom / nobody gets out alive writer of literary fiction who does not believe in happily ever afters. So now they meet years later at neighboring beach houses where they're both staying for the summer. And both of them are going through some pretty severe issues in their life, and both are suffering from writer's block. So one night they make a deal that will hopefully get them out of their creative ruts. Gus, our literary fiction writer, is to spend the next 3 months writing a swoony romance with a happy ending, whereas January is going to write a serious literary fiction novel. Oh, and there is one more stipulation. They will not fall in love with each other. So, we can imagine how that turns out. So this was a lot of fun. A bookish summer romance surrounding authors and books. And there's even a bookstore and a book club in this story. So I really ended up enjoying these two characters and the lively, witty banter and teasing between them. They also went out on these work dates where each had experienced the world of the other. So that is to say, going to happy places and then going to more somber, dark places. So while there is certainly the romance aspect to this story, there's a lot more to it than that. There's themes of betrayal, there's secrets, there's lies, illness, there's resentment, loneliness, and forgiveness, which render this story rather heart-wrenching in places. We even learn a little bit about cults in this story. So all in all, I really enjoyed the story here, and I love the dynamic between the two main characters. There was excellent chemistry between them, I thought. And you know, this book really took me by surprise, as I thought it was going to be a light and fluffy beach read, and I thought it'd be maybe your standard love/hate, enemies to lovers trope. But really, it ended up being so much more than that. And though it was an intense and raw read in places, it's ultimately a heartwarming, hopeful story with likable characters and plenty of substance. So yeah, beach read, I enjoyed it. So the next book that I read this month was also an e-arc, and I'll put the cover up above. And that was Dreamweaver by Des Schmidt, which is the third and final book in the Rome series. And boy, oh boy, what a finale. So I can't say too much about giving anything away about this book and the other two books. I'll just say that in this book, our hero, Ethan Rome, faces some formidable foes as he searches for the original Sandman in the hopes of defeating the leader as well as some overzealous minions of a cult called the Order of Azoth. We also see the introduction here of some new characters as well as the return of beloved favorites. So this final book had plenty of manic action and heart-stopping suspense and takes us down a dark and twisty path and then totally blows our mind with a phenomenal ending. I really love the fast-paced storyline of this book and this series, actually. The action-packed fight sequences, the high-tech gadgetry, which made this an especially fun read. So in this book, the action actually takes place in a couple of different worlds/locations and through a couple of different points of view, all of which added, I thought, an extra layer and an extra element of intrigue to the tale. And I really ended up falling in love with this exciting, fast-paced fantasy adventure populated with quite memorable and lovable characters. So yeah, I actually sat down on the couch and read this book in one sitting. So that gives you an idea of how excited I was about the plot and seeing how it would all turn out at the end. So yes, overall, a fun read and a fun series. So the last book I'm going to talk about in this wrap-up is called Conventionally Yours, written by Annabeth Albert. And there is also another e-arc that I read and requested. So Conventionally Yours is a new adult romance following our two main characters, Conrad and Alden, both expert players of a fictional game called Odyssey. So this book contained three of my favorite tropes: the enemies to lovers trope, opposites attract, and a road trip, complete with a hotel room with only one bed. So initially I wasn't quite sure about the gaming aspect of it, as I'm really not a gamer, but I didn't have worried, as the tensions between our two characters, along with their hidden pasts, rendered this an utterly compelling story for me. So this was actually the first book that I've read about gamers and gaming conventions. And though I'm not personally a gamer, I did find this aspect of the story a lot of fun. What made this story especially intriguing, though, was both of our characters' backstories. So there's Alden, who may or may not be on the autism spectrum, but who does suffer from crippling anxiety as well as the need to fulfill his mom's expectations. And then we have Conrad, who has suffered enormous setbacks over the past year and is on the verge of being homeless. So what's fun here is that each character sees the other in a completely different way than the person's actual reality. And of course, there's that I hate you, yet I find you strangely attractive aspect of it as well, which I always love. So in this way, both of our characters are quite complex and leading complicated lives. So our two enemies, each who is at a significant crossroads in his life, they're forced to travel to a gaming convention together alone in the same car. So as their trip progresses, they each find themselves developing more than a casual interest in the other, complete with unwelcome romantic thoughts. So I was nearly giddy as I saw them moving towards that inevitable romance, and it was so much fun watching these two fighting their attraction to each other and ultimately giving into it. So there was also the extra added intrigue of the uber important Odyssey Con competition, where both of these men felt that they have to win no matter what. So overall, Conventionally Yours was a sweet, fun, heartfelt, nerdy romance, an excellent, well-crafted story that was a perfect blend of romance and gaming, an interesting combination. So I thought this was a heartwarming story of two boys, two very complicated boys, finding their way to each other. And I really ended up loving the quirky plot and the endearing secondary characters. So what we have here then is a rivalry between two master gamers, which turns into a whirlwind romance in this charming story about true love and doing what's right. So that is it for part 1 of my May wrap-up. Stay tuned. Within the next day or two, I will post part 2 of the video. I know I should have done this in the middle of the month, but it's been a crazy couple of months, as I'm sure it has been for many of you as well. So, as always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, please click the like button below, as that really helps my channel out. And that's it. I will talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.